It all started with a whispered conversation in a dusty yard under the burning sun. Two men. One was a coronel, a powerful land baron in Brazil, similar to an old-time southern plantation owner. The other, a hitman. And there was only one mission: kill Lampião. It wasn't the first time they tried, but this time the plan came soaked in blood, gold, and urgency. The man they hired didn't talk much. Dry eyes, a scar across his cheek, and a soul already sold for silver. He knew the Cangaço, a brutal outlaw lifestyle in Brazil's Backlands, much like the American Wild West. He knew the terrain, he knew the shortcuts, and he promised to bring back Lampião's head before sunrise. But what no one knew was that Lampião was already watching. He had already learned the traitor's name, and he wasn't waiting for the first shot. He didn't run, he didn't hide, he didn't forgive. They say that night, the sertão, a dry, forgotten region of northeastern Brazil, much like the Wild West, burned like never before, and hell was here. If you're into real outlaw stories like this one, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, drop a like, and turn on the notification bell. Every week, you'll hear what Brazil forgot, but the people of the Backlands still remember. The sun slashed across the Backlands sky like a blade of fire. It was 1928. That dry morning held not a single cloud, just a harsh blue, and the heat grinding the cracked earth. The mandacaru, a native cactus of Brazil, bent under the sun, silent and still, and in the middle of that arid landscape, a man rested with a dagger across his lap. Virgulino Ferreira da Silva. Few knew his full name, but his nickname thundered across the region: Lampião. Lampião was the most feared outlaw leader in Brazil's history, often compared to Jesse James or Billy the Kid. There, in a forgotten corner of the state of Sergipe, Lampião and his band had taken refuge in an abandoned farm. They were fleeing the volantes, state patrols trained to hunt cangaceros. Volantes were rural police forces specialized in fighting outlaws in Brazil's Backlands. They had arrived in the dead of night, feet sore, gunpowder running low, but their pride untouched. Maria Bonita, always by the captain's side, was brewing strong coffee over a makeshift fire, while the other cangaceros kept watch in the surrounding brush. Cangaceros were nomadic outlaws from the early 20th century, Brazilian Backlands, similar in legend to Wild West bandits, but with a unique code of honor. "Captain, we're almost out of ammo," whispered Corisco, stepping out from the thickets. "We need to head to Piranhas to restock." Lampião didn't answer right away. His eyes were locked beyond the scrubland, as if he could see through the thorns. It was his instinct, the sixth sense of a man who'd been hunted by death for years. After a long pause, he finally muttered, "Tonight we head for Coronel Zusa's estate. He still owes me old favors." In Brazil, coronel referred to powerful landowners with military or political influence, much like warlords or old-time southern bosses. But Lampião didn't know that on that same morning, not far from where he rested, Coronel Zusa Pereira was receiving a dangerous visitor. Inside his home, luxury fought against the heat. The coronel, a fat old man with a thick mustache, was pouring sugarcane liquor, cachaça, for a man with dead eyes and a scar across his cheek. "They say you're the best at what you do. Jararaca." the old man said in a low voice. "That's why I paid so much." Jararaca smiled with contempt. A gold tooth caught the glow of the oil lamp. He wasn't a cangachero. He followed no code. He killed for money. Period. Lampião made you dance in front of your own men. Jararaca spat. He took your cattle, your pride, and tied you to an ant-hill. The coronel clenched his fists, that memory still burning in his flesh. "I don't want just his death," he growled. "I want him to suffer, to beg." Jararaca didn't blink. "It'll happen." "I have informants," he added coldly, "who say Lampião's low on men, and almost out of ammo. Soon, that so-called king of the Cangaço will be nothing more than a ghost story whispered to scare kids on the porch." But neither of them noticed. Someone was listening behind the half-open door. Zé Sereno, a young ranch hand, quiet, soft-spoken, and carrying a debt in his heart. Years ago, Lampião had saved his sister from the filthy hands of a volante soldier. And now, Zé knew he couldn't let that trap unfold. When night fell like a black veil over the sertão, Sereno slipped away from the estate in silence. He mounted his skinny horse and disappeared into the dark. He had one mission: find Lampião's group before it was too late. Elsewhere, at the improvised campsite, Lampião was preparing to move toward Coronel Zusa's estate, but the night felt too quiet. Maria Bonita, ever watchful, noticed her partner fiddling with his guns non-stop. That gesture, she knew it. It was a sign, a warning. "You feel something, Virgulino," she whispered, using the name she only spoke in moments of tenderness. Lampião stayed silent for a moment. He looked up at the star-filled sky, then down at the small crucifix he always carried. "The sertão is too still, Maria. And when the Backlands go silent like this, it means death is nearby." Meanwhile, just a few kilometers away, Jararaca was advancing with a group of 5 armed men. Among them, a familiar face from the past, Cravignotta, a former cangacero who once betrayed Lampião for money. "He'll move at night," Cravignotta muttered. "Lampião knows every trail in these woods. If we don't catch him off guard, we'll be the ones buried before sunrise." Jararaca simply nodded. He was good with a rifle, but even better with dirty plans. He wasn't looking for a fight. He wanted a clean ambush, but the sertão had other plans. Ceserino rode without rest, guided by the stars and the instinct of someone who knew that land like the back of his hand. When he saw the faint glow of a nearly dead fire, he knew he'd found the group. He approached slowly, his heart racing, eyes scanning the shadows. "I'm a friend," he shouted from a distance. "I bring urgent news for Captain Lampião." In seconds, rifles rose from the darkness. He was surrounded by cangacheros, fingers on the triggers. They brought him to Lampião, who stared at him with the hard eyes of a man who trusts no one. But after a few tense seconds, he recognized the young ranch hand from the past. "Speak, boy. What bad wind blew you here at this hour?" Breathing hard from the long ride, Zé Sereno spilled everything. The meeting at the coronel's house, the contract on Lampião's life, the name of the hitman, Jararaca, and even the presence of a traitor, Cravignotta. That name made Lampião's eyes burn with a cold hatred. "So, Coronel Zusa wants my head," Lampião muttered, "more for revenge than power, and he even brought in the viper, Jararaca." A heavy silence spread through the camp. Everyone there knew who Jararaca was. They knew what he was capable of. "What are we going to do, Captain?" asked Corisco, always hungry for a fight. Lampião said nothing for a moment, his face lit by the dying embers of the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, the kind that only comes before the worst storm in the sertão. "We're going to show them," he said, "that when you mess with the king of the Cangaço, you dance with the devil." The camp was torn down in minutes, but no one was fleeing. Lampião wasn't running. He was flipping the game. He knew every corner of that harsh backcountry, and he knew exactly how to use the enemy's plan against them. He split the group into 3 squads, one under his command, another with Corisco, and the third led by Maria Bonita Churs. Some men frowned at that, but she had already proven herself as brave as any outlaw in the band. Under the cover of darkness, the 3 groups moved through the Caatinga, a dry, thorny landscape native to Brazil's northeast, like sharpened shadows, ready to surround the enemy before sunrise. On the other side, Jararaca had already arrived at the ambush site. He positioned his men carefully, forming a deadly semicircle along the path to Coronel Zusa's estate. "Now we wait," he growled, a cruel grin curling at the corner of his mouth. "When the sun rises, Lampião will be vulture food." But what he didn't know was that at that very moment, he was the one being watched. Just meters away, hidden among dry branches, Lampião was watching everything, every man, every position, every move. The full moon climbed into the sky when the first gunshot tore through the night. The ambush had begun, but not the way Jararaca expected. Instead of walking into the trap, Lampião's men had circled around and attacked from all 3 sides. The gunfight was fast and brutal. Jararaca's men were caught completely off guard. Screams echoed through the brush, mixed with the crack of rifles. Within seconds, 2 of his men were down. The others scrambled for cover. Jararaca fell back with cold calculation, hiding behind a rock formation where he could see the chaos unfold. And that's when he saw it. About 50 meters ahead, a silhouette he'd never forget. The curved leather hat. It was him. Lampião Jararaca didn't hesitate. He took careful aim, pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, straight into the chest of the Cangacero. Lampião staggered backward, and the body dropped into the brush. A twisted smile crept across Jararaca's lips. He could already picture himself collecting the reward from Coronel Zusa, his pride swelling at the thought of having killed the king of the Cangaço. But the celebration didn't last. A cold voice sliced through the air behind him like a blade through bone. "Who do you think you just killed, Jararaca?" He turned around, and there he was, the real Lampião, standing, smirking. The man Jararaca had shot wasn't Lampião at all. It was Cravinot, dressed in the captain's hat and clothes, a trap inside a trap. "You," Jararaca whispered, realizing, far too late, that he'd been outplayed at his own game. "A traitor dies a traitor's death," Lampião said, rifle aimed squarely at Jararaca's chest. "But first, you're going to take me to the one who hired you." Jararaca took a slow breath. He was alone. His men were dead or had fled, and in front of him stood the most feared man in the Brazilian Backlands. He tried to buy time, like any snake would. "If you kill me, you'll never find out who else is behind this," he bluffed, raising both hands. "There are powerful people out for your head, Lampião." A cold glint flashed in the captain's eyes. "I don't need you to tell me. I know. Colonel Zusa hired you. The question is, who else is working with him? Jararaca hesitated. Lampião clearly knew more than he let on. On instinct, he reached for a hidden knife in his boot. Too slow. The butt of the rifle cracked against his temple, and everything went black. When he came to, Jararaca was tied to a jurema tree. Jurema is a thorny tree common in the Brazilian Backlands. He was surrounded by cangaceiros. Lampião sat nearby, calmly wiping his blade with a stained rag. "Now we're going to talk about Coronel Zusa," he said, with the kind of quiet that frightens more than shouting. "And you're going to tell me everything, every last thread of your lies." Above them, the stars shined down, indifferent, silent witnesses to yet another dark chapter of the Cangaço. Meanwhile, back at the coronel's estate, Zusa himself was still waiting for word, but the night remained silent. Restless, he had spent the whole night drinking, pacing the floor. Like a haunted soul, since sending out Jararaca and his men, he'd received no letter, no rumor, nothing. And in the sertão, silence speaks loud. They should have returned by now, he muttered, bloodshot eyes fixed on the road cutting through the mandacaris, the cactus thickets. His trusted foreman, Anastasio, approached slowly. "Coronel, you should rest. When the sun rises, I'll send some men to look for them." "Shut your mouth," the coronel snapped, irritated. He knew Lampião's reputation, knew the man was cunning, but he had placed his bet on Jararaca, a killer who never missed. Now with time slipping away and the silence growing heavier, fear was starting to claw its way into his chest. "Get my horse ready and gather 10 armed men," he ordered at last. "We'll go see for ourselves what happened." The coronel growled, mounting his horse. The first rays of sunlight painted the sky blood red as he and his men rode toward the ambush site. The silence was heavy. Every hoofbeat sounded like a warning of doom. Everyone knew what Lampião did to traitors, and no one wanted to be the next name carved into his blade. Halfway there, they saw a man staggering down the road, alone. His face was covered in blood. One arm hung limp like a broken branch. As they got closer, they recognized him as one of the jagunços who had left with Jararaca. Jagunço, more hired gun or enforcer in rural Brazil, similar to a gunslinger or mercenary. "Help, for the love of God." He groaned, barely standing. The coronel quickly dismounted and grabbed the man by the shoulders. "What happened? Where's Jararaca? Where's Lampião?" Shaking like a leaf, the jagunço began to talk. The ambush had become a trap. Lampião had known everything. It was like he had eyes and ears across the entire brushland. One by one, Jararaca's men were taken down. Only he had escaped, crawling through the crossfire. "And Jararaca?" the coronel asked, his blood turning to ice. "They took him alive," Captain Lampião said. "He was going to use him as a messenger." Before he could finish the sentence, a single gunshot cracked through the caatinga. The man fell forward, a clean hole in the back of his head. In the very next instant, a storm of bullets tore across the road. Half of the coronel's men dropped before they could even reach for their weapons. "Ambush!" shouted Anastasio, pulling his boss behind a rock. The survivors ran, scattering like cattle in the middle of a stampede. From behind bushes and boulders, cangaceiros burst forth. Led by Carisco, his maniacal laughter echoed with every shot. A soundtrack straight from hell. And Lampião? nowhere in sight, which made it even worse. Those who knew the captain understood. When he disappears, it's because he's setting something even worse in motion. To the estate, the colonel shouted. We've got more men there, more ammo. They rode as fast as they could, firing back when possible. Behind them, a few cangacheros followed on horseback, but kept their distance, as if they didn't want to catch them, just push them forward. When they reached the estate, the colonel shouted for reinforcements, but the only answer was silence. The yard was empty, no ranch hands, no guards, no one. "Where is everyone?" he whispered, eyes scanning the place in panic. The answer came, in the form of a woman's laugh. On the front porch of the big house, sitting in the colonel's own chair, was Maria Bonita, rifle resting on her lap, eyes flashing. "Good timing, Coronel," she said, with a smile void of warmth. "We were starting to think we'd have to go find you ourselves." The colonel's heart froze. His house taken. The front yard surrounded. From every corner, cangacheros began to appear, guns raised, faces hard. The trap was shut. "Where are my men?" he asked, his voice already faltering. "Where is my family?" he demanded, still trying to sound in control. But his voice trembled, betrayed by fear. "Your jagunsos ran like rats when we got here," Maria Bonita answered, rising with the grace of a jaguar. "As for your family, don't worry. We don't wage war on women or children. They're locked in the barn. Safe. Treated well." The colonel nearly sighed in relief, but the moment was cut short by the sound of footsteps from inside the house. There he was, the nightmare of land barons, the most feared name in the Northeast, Virgulino Ferreira da Silva, Lampião leather hat, Winchester rifle slung over his shoulder, eyes of a man who had survived everything. "Welcome home, Coronel," he said, voice dripping with irony. "Or, rather, welcome to my house now." Behind him, two cangacheros dragged in a half-conscious man, his face swollen with bruises. It was Jararaca. Still conscious but defeated, he looked at the colonel with eyes that begged for forgiveness. "How did you find out?" Zusa murmured, already knowing there was no point in denying it. Lampião stepped down the stairs slowly, like a predator on the hunt. He stopped in front of the colonel and made a small gesture. Zusa dismounted, his legs shaking like dry leaves. "The sertão has ears, Coronel," Lampião said, circling him. "You thought I had no friends in this town, that no one would tell me about your betrayal." Zusa looked around, searching for a familiar face, until he saw Zé Sereno standing silently in the back. "You," he hissed, "you ungrateful brat, after everything I did for you and your family." Zé Sereno didn't flinch. "You didn't help us, Coronel," he said. "You exploited our people, and you tried to have a man killed from the shadows. Like a coward." Lampião smiled, then turned back to Zusa with eyes that had long forgotten mercy. "You know, Zusa, I could have killed you last year when I raided your estate in Piranhas, or right now, but death would be far too kind for someone like you." With a simple nod, he gave an order. Two cangacheros entered and returned carrying a heavy chest, which they dropped at the coronel's feet. "Open it," with trembling hands. Zusa obeyed. Inside, everything he had ever accumulated: money, jewels, documents. "This now belongs to the people you drove off their land," Lampião declared. "It will be distributed to the poor families from around here. the same ones you humiliated for years. The coronel turned pale. Everything he had built was crumbling right there in front of him. "Bring paper and ink," Lampião ordered. When they returned, he began to dictate, a document in which Coronel Zusa transferred half of his lands to the working families who had served that estate for generations. "You're going to sign this, Coronel," Lampião said, "and after that, you'll swear an oath. In front of everyone, you'll promise never to try to reclaim this land or seek revenge against anyone involved." "And what if I refuse?" the coronel asked, trying to gather the last, shattered pieces of his pride. Lampião's smile widened, white teeth, sun-scorched skin, and the calm of a man who had already decided someone else's fate. "Then Jararaca won't be the only one made an example of today." As if on cue, Corisco shoved the hitman into the center of the courtyard. Jararaca tried to resist, but he was done, easily restrained. "You choose, Coronel?" Lampião continued, his voice sharp like a blade. "Sign the document now, or sign it after watching what happens to those who try to stab me in the back." Zusa looked at Jararaca, then at the cangaceros surrounding him, then at the paper. He sighed, defeated, picked up the pen, and signed. "Smart man," Lampião said, taking the still wet paper. "But the signature was only the beginning. Now, to make sure you keep your word." The moment turned into something ceremonial, macabre, symbolic. Coronel Zusa was forced to kneel and swear before everyone present, the cangaceros, the estate's workers now gathering near, and even his own family, brought from the barn to witness. He swore to honor the deal, to never seek revenge, to never attempt to reclaim the land, and to make sure you never forget this day, Lampião added. He gave a signal. Corisco stepped forward, shining knife in hand. The coronel's scream echoed across the sertão as the blade carved a deep L into his face. It was Lampião's mark, not to kill, but to leave a memory, a scar for all to see, and for every coronel to remember. As for Jararaca, his fate was even crueler. Lampião didn't stain his own hands. He didn't need to. Killing a man like Jararaca would be too easy, too merciful. He wanted punishment. He ordered the hitman tied to a huazero tree at the entrance of the estate. Around his neck, a wooden sign hung, "Traitor and Coward." And there he stayed, under the sun, with no water, no food. He would be left to the sertão, to let the land finish what Lampião had started. Before leaving, Lampião walked up to the coronel one last time. "Know this, Coronel," he said. "I could have done much worse. Burned your house, killed your cattle, destroyed everything you built with other people's sweat. But I chose to let you live, so you could watch this land go to the people who actually worked it." Then, turning to the workers watching from a distance, caught between fear and hope, Lampião raised the document in the air. "Starting today," he declared, "half of this land belongs to you, and if anyone tries to take it back, just send word. Lampião will return." A murmur of shock and joy rippled through the families. People who had never dreamed of freedom. People who had spent their whole lives owing the store, waiting for a miracle that never came. "Don't be fooled," the coronel shouted in a final burst of fury. "When he leaves, the police will come. That paper won't mean a damn thing." Lampião just smiled, calm, as if he'd expected this all along. "I've already sent copies of this document to every local newspaper and to the district judge," he said. "Your signature is notarized, Coronel, and there are far too many witnesses for you to deny it." The Coronel went pale. For the first time he understood this wasn't just revenge. It was a plan, strategic, precise, designed to rip his power out by the roots. Lampião didn't just want to humiliate him. He wanted to take away his entire foundation. With one last look of contempt, the captain mounted his horse. He gave a silent hand signal, and the Cangacheros moved in line behind him, riding off into the Caatinga the same way they had arrived. Like shadows, even the noonday sun couldn't chase away. Coronel Zusa stood alone in the courtyard. He touched the wound still bleeding on his face. The mark, the L, a living reminder of his downfall. Around the courtyard, the workers began to approach. Slowly, cautiously, still unsure if what they'd seen was real. Some smiled softly, others just watched in silence. The few remaining jagunchos, the ones still loyal, looked to the Coronel for orders. But none of them dared speak. Anastasio, the old foreman, stepped forward. "And now, Coronel, what do we do?" Zusa looked toward the horizon, toward the path where Lampião had vanished. The hate and shame inside his chest boiled like venom. "Now," he answered, voice weak, "now we learn to live with the scars, Anastasio. Some on the skin, others deep in the soul." And so ended what the people would later call the day of Lampião's revenge. In the months that followed, the tale spread across the sertão like wildfire. Each mouth added a little more, as every good legend does. But one thing no one ever denied. Once again, the cunning of the king of the Cangaço had defeated the power of the rich. Jararaca's body was found days later, the sign around his neck still hanging. That alone was enough to scare off every hitman in the region. For a long time, no one accepted money to go after Lampião. They preferred easier targets, and ones less likely to come back for revenge. As for Coronel Zusa, he was never the same. The L-shaped scar remained etched across his face. Half his land really did go to the workers. They formed a modest cooperative, with support from local merchants who secretly sympathized with Lampião Maria Bonita, who had played a key role in the ambush, earned even more respect. The women of the Backlands began to see her as more than just the bandit's partner. A leader, a strategist, a woman with the courage of any armed man. Zé Sereno, the ranch hand who gave the warning, joined the group. He became one of Lampião's most loyal cangaceros. His family was protected and relocated to safe land on the border between Alagoas and Sergipe, far from the Coronel's reach. Lampião continued his saga, always on the move, always defying the Volantes, the patrols sent to kill him, and always building his legend as a man known across Brazil's backlands as ruthless, brave, and just. And the story of Zusa's ranch became another chapter in the unwritten book of the Cangaço, a legend that kept Lampião's name alive until his very last days. Years later, when the police finally cornered the band in Angicos and the blood of the king of the Backlands spilled onto the earth one last time, there were still those who swore that in that unforgiving backland, where the sun punishes and the people never forget, the tales of justice still roam free, and that on nights with a full moon you can still hear, far off in the distance, Maria Bonita's laughter, and the steady footsteps of Lampião echoing through the Mandacaras, reminding everyone that, for one brief and glorious moment, power had changed hands. Justice, though wild and ruthless, had passed through. Not the justice written in books, not the justice of marble halls. It was the justice of the Backlands, bloody, dry, painful, but real. And as the sun once again scorched the cracked ground of that forgotten land, no one could forget that the king of the Cangaço had been there and had left his mark. And if you think that was the last time Lampião challenged the powerful, you better sit tight, because more savage stories are on the way. And if you made it this far, cabra, you've earned your place in the gang. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell, and leave a like, because that helps the Backlands keep echoing through Brazil's memory. We drop new videos every week here on Echoes of the Backlands. So drop a comment below. What would you have done if you lived back then? See you next time, my outlaw friend, because the story ain't over yet.